Before today's episode begins, I just want to make a quick announcement. Beyond the Screenplay has launched a Patreon. So if you would like to help support our show, head to our Patreon. The link is in the show notes, and become a patron. We have some fun perks, including access to 2 patron-exclusive episodes of the show. It's a great way for you to give us feedback and help shape the show. So check it out, search for Beyond the Screenplay on Patreon, or visit the link in the show notes. Hi, I'm Michael. Welcome to Beyond the Screenplay. Today we're talking about the 2002 film Minority Report, and I am joined by the Lessons from the Screenplay team, writer Trisha Arand.
Hello, everybody.
Writer Brian Bittner.
Hello.
And editor Alex Calleros.
Hi.
So Brian, Minority Report was all you. It was your idea. Why did you want to talk about Minority Report?
Well, actually, I would argue you wanted to talk about Minority Report from a list of just a bunch of movies I gave you a long time ago, and you pointed that one out. And I thought, Minority Report, I don't know if that's really a screenwritery movie. I don't know what I would want to talk about. And then I started thinking, I guess, world building, because that's the most interesting thing about Minority Report is the world. And then when I started doing research, I realized that there was this middle screenplay. There was Philip K. Dick's book, and then John Cohen's script, and then Scott Frank's script. And they had spoken a lot about the things that they changed, the things that didn't make sense about the book. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized that I could sort of make a hybrid video that was about that process, but also about world building, because the things they changed made the world make more sense and made the sort of ending more satisfying, et cetera, et cetera. So it was just sort of a process of kicking around a lot of those ideas until it kind of fused into something you had done with Arrival and Inside Out, as we talked about, more of like a historical process kind of thing. And I really like that. So I thought, let's talk about how a movie kind of came to be, but also take lessons from that process.
Yeah, it was really interesting learning about how much it had changed. And I kind of had a similar experience when I did the Blade Runner video, because I read the Philip K. Dick story that became Blade Runner, and it was really interesting seeing all the things that were really similar, but were also just super different. And so it was really cool that you were able to find those multiple drafts of the screenplay and kind of see the iterative changes that happened. Yeah,
I've also read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and it's so funny how the very broad strokes. If you explain the story in 2 sentences to somebody, they'd be like, oh, it sounds the same, but almost no individual scene or moment is the same in the book and the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like them both.
Yeah. I feel like Minority Report is one I've always loved because I like film noir stories and I like sci-fi stories, and it's such a great film noir sci-fi story, and it was really fun to see Steven Spielberg's take on it. And revisiting it, I was a little worried that it wouldn't hold up, but I feel like overall I really enjoyed watching it again. I don't know about you guys.
Well, I mean, the thing that I really want more of in sci-fi is good design fiction. And design fiction is kind of defined as you're using a piece of fiction to actually design the future, to actually invent, here's what the future could look like in a really deep, full-fledged way, not just like, oh, here's one technology, what if this, but the whole world is built out. And Minority Report is one of the few movies that really does that and really commits to it. And it's not like a fantastical Star Wars world building. It's what would maybe Washington, D.C. be like in 2054. And it really commits to that. And he did the research. He talked to futurists and scientists and people who are looking at what's next.
He had a 3-day think tank with 15 scientists.
Yeah, and you can just, and it shows.
Decide what this. Yeah.
It shows because it's the kind of sci-fi that why don't we have more of this? And I'm sure it's because it's hard. You have to really do the research. But I really think it's such an impressive feat of full-fledged world building that's not just kind of a fantasy world building, but truly trying to think 10 steps ahead. Where we're going to be with privacy, with the way that our bodies are being scanned, the way advertising is directed towards us. I mean, it didn't happen the way he thought exactly, but it happened. It definitely happened. Just scroll on your Instagram and you'll see some creepy ads that are targeted right towards you somehow.
Yep.
So, yeah.
I like that term, design fiction. I don't think I've ever heard it before, but it's so apt in terms of this movie. And I think that's part of the reason why this story, really comes together, because it feels near enough. And it's, I don't know what years it's supposedly set in, Brian.
20 54.
It's 2054.
Yeah.
Okay. See, that actually feels realistic.
Right.
Like, I mean, it's not flying cars. They have these like, magnetic system. And then they have, which we have self-driving cars. Like that's a thing now where the car is taking him where he's going, whether he wants to go there or not, that kind of thing, and then exploring. Obviously, we were talking about all the advertising and stuff like that. In holograms, he's got the holograms in his house. It's like, all of that is really within reach. I don't think there's anything funnier than, watching like Back to the Future now, where that date has now come and gone
Right.
and we don't have any of that stuff.
Right.
So the work that they put into it obviously really shows, but it also really enables you to let go of some of those elements when you see them, which is exactly what the video is about, because we don't need to have all of that explained to us. It is close enough that it's not so far away that there has to be a ton of exposition of like, this is how the cars work. We don't need that scene because we understand that those are cars. And so it enables the story to really focus on the story and really focus on the character, which is, that arc is what keeps it all together and keeps it engaging and keeps it human, when it could just devolve into gadget left and right.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a really
Yeah.
good point, that even though the design fiction is so front and center, it's never what the story's about. Like we said in the video, the pre-crime system is the only important technology, really. Everything
Yeah.
else is just kind of part of the mise en scène as he's moving through this world. But it's not about that.
It's kind of an interesting litmus test of like, if it's a realistic near future, like you don't need to explain everything because everyone can just picture themselves 10 years in the future and understand like, yeah, this is what cars will be, without having to like hold the audience's hand and do it that way.
The word I use a lot of time is incidental, which is things that, whether it's fantasy or sci-fi, things that are just there and they enrich the tapestry of what you're watching. But in Children of Men, like the speedometer is like on the windshield, and it's like nobody ever has to call attention to it. I understand it, but it just makes me go, especially in a movie like Children of Men, which feels so unfuturistic. It adds to that, like, no, we are in the future, even if like everything's gone to hell. And I know it's like a little corny, but I think it's Prisoner of Azkaban, the third Harry Potter movie, where they go into it's the leaky cauldron, I think, for the first time.
Okay.
And there's just like, there's a guy stirring his drink with his finger, like his finger is moving and like the drink is stirring, and like there's just a lot of that little like, here's the way this world works. We don't need to like call attention to it. We don't need to like show you how cool it is. It's just like, it's going to be there in the background if you're paying attention. I like that.
Well, and Corona is like the master of that.
Right.
He's
Both
like,
of those
Exactly.
examples. Yeah.
he's just so good at like, I mean, in Roma, everything he does,
Yeah.
he just like lets that stuff be in the frame and enriching the world, but he never is like, look at this thing.
Right.
It's he's such a master. I love him.
And clumsy world building really draws attention to itself in a negative way.
Right. Even some of the earlier Harry Potter films, it probably would have been a close up of the spoon moving by itself, because it's like, look at the magic and fine.
Right.
Yeah.
Because Columbus was like the opposite end of the spectrum.
Right.
It was like
Yeah.
kids seeing a giant thing and looking at it and look how surprised they are by the giant thing. Yeah.
Which is fine, but there's something so elegant about the Alfonso Cuarón approach.
Yeah, exactly. And in this case, the Spielberg approach.
Yes.
I recently got to be on a friend's podcast and we got to talk about AI, which he made right before this. And
He made it before this.
he,
right.
he made it. It was right before this.
What a little moment for Spielberg. It's
Yeah.
like amazing
Yeah.
future worlds he was building.
Yeah. And they definitely aesthetically sort of are in conversation.
They feel related.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
do. Thematically, they're not really that linked at all. But even in AI, which has its many problems as a movie, it does have this same sort of like, it works really well because there's a lot of faith in the audience, basically, of just like, I'm going to show you this thing. You can do it. Like, I don't have to hold your hand all the way through it, which we see from our best filmmakers all the time, both about world building and about all kinds of story elements, where they give us the pieces, they trust us to figure it out, and then they go on and do what they're trying to do, which is tell the story. So it's really smart of Spielberg. And you have that quote from him in the video of like, don't get bogged down.
Right.
Don't worry about the technology. Although whoever invented those 6 sticks that like make people
That
vomit,
was one of the like,
That was-
technologies. I was like, why do we need this?
No!
Like,
Strange.
just shock them or something. Make them vomit.
That was in
it
John
would-
Cohen's script, I think, because the Philip K. Dick version, the Philip K. Dick story is like there's almost no tech. I think they have like a flying like ship or something, but other than that, there's very little in that. And then John Cohen came up with all the eye stuff. Because he was talking about how he had this like motif of sight, so that's why he chose the eye thing. He was very glad that like it stayed that much stayed in. Yeah, exactly. Also,
That was on the poster, wasn't it? Yeah.
the woman he goes to see is Iris Hinneman. Get it?
Because the name is
Yeah.
Iris.
I get it.
But he had a lot of that, a lot of those techie things. I think he had the 6 sticks. He had like a gun that shoots like goo, and then at one point Anderton like uses Anderson, because apparently Anderton is too weird in sci-fi.
And it was Anderton in the original story?
In the original, yeah.
So
It's John Allison Anderton in the original story,
Allison.
and then Paul Anderson in the. I don't know why like these
back
weird.
to Anderton.
And then back to John Anderton, and then Ed Whitwer to Danny Whitwer, because Colin Farrell's more of a Danny.
Yeah, man.
But anyway, at one point, Anderson uses like the sticky goo gun to like shoot it at himself and then get stuck to like a wall, so that when the pre-cops come in, they don't see him because he's up on the wall.
It's like a very Spider-Man kind of moment.
Yeah.
It's not a bad
gun.
script, but you can really see how it's like that script would not have been as good of a movie. But it's really cool to see how Scott Frank took John Cohen's script and said, "There's a lot of good stuff here. Let's keep all this stuff and then let's expand on it." It wasn't let's throw this out. It wasn't let's try to stay super faithful to it. It was like let's just find the best of the best, and kind of best of the Dick, best of the Cohen, best of the Frank, like put it all together, and that's what you finally get.
I think what's so interesting to me watching it is that it's unlike other sci-fi noirs. Like, if I'm comparing it to Blade Runner is so dark and moody and weird, and like somehow Spielberg was able to go to those places. Like Minority Report is grungy and so grainy, so grainy.
Film grain, so much film grain.
Yep.
And dirty and all these things, but it's also like a fun adventure noir.
Well, this is the thing. You keep calling it noir, and I feel like you are walking dangerously along the edge of the age-old debate: is noir style or is noir genre. And so
There's definitely shots when the composition and the way it's like so noir.
Yeah, but not when you stand it next to something like Blade Runner,
But I feel
Right.
like even thematically, though, I think it is dealing with all those heavy things.
Right.
And I think there are, as you were saying, Alex,
The
moments where
conspiracy
visually, while I was watching, I was like, I kind of want to turn all the saturation down and see what and I feel like it would look cool in black and white, which is one of my standards for noir.
One of the shots like, near the end of the movie when Whitwer and Lamar, the founder, in Anderton's apartment, and they're watching the projection of the Anne Lively murder, just like the shot of the two of them, the two shot with like, for some reason there's like fog in the apartment. Right. It's like the way it's lit.
because it's a Spielberg movie.
Yeah,
Right.
and but it's so noir, like
Yeah.
everything, and then the way he shoots him, and it like the camera moves down to the gun, and it's a smoking gun. It's like it's so classic.
I'm R.I.P. Danny Whitwer, but
Yeah,
I love his death in this movie.
it's a good death.
It's incredible because the first time I saw it, I did not know it was coming. I did not know Burgess was the guy.
The sound is so loud when he
Yes.
shoots. Yeah,
Again, you don't see the shot, you don't see the gun, you just see him slide down into frame, and oh boy, it's really emotional. And like I agree with you, it's pure noir in its plot elements and in its character types and these kinds of themes. I would be hesitant to call it that stylistically, but I do think it is existing sort of in that same world.
it's almost like it's like
Yeah.
as close as Spielberg is going to come to a noir, maybe, because he also has a car jumping sequence.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Right.
And then they're
Ooh, the vertical frogger.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and Michael and I were talking about in that whole like car assembly factory scene, that's the one weird place where it's like, wait, what is this movie now? Because like when Colin Farrell and Tom Cruise are like on like a forklift moving
Yeah.
thing, and like now it's time for a fist fight.
I like that.
And then he has to like take out his like necklace and kiss his
his
legs.
rosary.
He gotta
Yeah.
kiss his rosary, and
Yeah.
it's like
Look how Catholic he is.
That sequence is 8 pages long in the script. It's like one of the few things from the Scott Frank script that was cut down quite a bit, because it's like, first of all, Whitwer is like, I'm going to dismiss these cops and bring in my friend cops. So right away you're like, oh great, we don't care if those guys get hurt because they're not Anderton's
Right.
friends. And then it's just like these guys running all over the factory and like conveniently getting like hurt by machinery and not by Anderton. You know, it's this sort of like friendly violence. And
right.
Yeah. I'm just
because he's got that gun that like this'll knock you away.
Sound.
I do like that
moving.
gun, and how he reloads it is fun. I like that.
How he reloads it is fun.
Yeah,
That's kind of a silly gun.
It's like a non,
but
lethal
that would be
sound
like
wave.
if you had to fire that in an environment that wasn't
Yeah.
a big factory, it could be
Right.
very disastrous.
That's true. That's true.
I feel like there are lots of little things like that where like also in the opening scene, which I think you pointed out well, Brian, in your draft of like it's such a good example of like pre-crime at its best, where they're
Right.
stopping this murder before it's very clear that he's going to stab his wife with these scissors. And Anderton gets there and like grabs it just in time, and he like knocks the scissors out of the window, and it's like, okay, cool, you did it. And then everyone crashes through the ceiling and like knocks all the shards of glass onto the bed where the innocent people are just standing there.
Right.
It's
That
like,
is
that's
pretty goofy.
so, and like that means those people got back in their ship and then flew up above, located the skylight, and then dropped back down.
Right.
And that just seems very
Well, speaking of
unnecessary.
things like that, how the heck does Anderton survive the car assembly where a seat
I don't know.
it literally
First of all-
shows a seat go down onto
Yeah.
him, and then the seat is sealed in with like sparks, and then he rises.
As long as you cut away before someone dies, they don't die. Like that's
but like
movie.
it literally
That's
shows
movie,
it cuts
yeah.
from him looking up and blocking his face
Oh, I
to
know.
a seat crushing him. So I don't
we have
yeah.
vertical Frogger, then we have the jetpack thing where he's going through like
jetpacks are pretty dumb too. I'm
but
sorry.
like the jetpack like cooks the burgers in the house and
that was like
everything.
the most like old-fashioned
It's a groan.
Spielbergy
Yeah.
like moment of the whole movie. It was like
it's like 80s Spielberg
it's
right
80s,
there.
yeah.
That whole sequence is the only part of Minority Report where I'm just like, oof, you know. The opening sequence, I don't actually like his direction. The very close up on Howard Marks. You know how blind I am without him. And then when they take the halo out, the camera stays behind the halo and like the camera keeps
I'm kind
moving,
of
so the
okay with
halo's
that.
always it's just a little. I think it's him trying to be noir. It's him trying to find those like cool close ups,
Stylistic
and stuff.
elements. Yeah. But I want to return, if we can, put a pause on hating on this movie because we do really love it.
I absolutely. By the way, I love this movie.
Those
I
are basically
I
my
like
big
to laugh
things.
at the couple
Sure,
of Spielberg things,
which they are,
but I
yeah.
love this movie.
No, there's plenty of goofy Spielberg in it.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we can talk about the body horror stuff later with all the eyes and everything, but
Right. There's a whole period in the middle that gets pretty gross.
yeah, it does. And it really is just sort of a detour, but we are talking about that later. What I wanted to say is sort of going back to Witwer, he is an excellent antagonist. He is a great example of a really three-dimensional antagonist who is also a person, where he is a reasonable person. He has been given a job. He is trying to be excellent at his job, and it just happens to put him into conflict with Anderton. It is absolutely like he's highly sympathetic for that reason. He's not, Burgess ends up sort of being more of a classic, like, I'm a sneaky villain, I'm corrupt, like, kind of a guy. They give Burgess very little to do, unfortunately, and then to have the whole payoff be about him. That's why Witwer's death is so devastating, is because he's actually a very sympathetic character who happens to be at odds with Anderton, and in such a way that the script doesn't feel trapped, or it's not trapping Witwer in the villain role. Like, Witwer is sort
especially
of
once
free.
he starts to figure things out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Witwer is sort of a free agent in a lot of ways, and he's free to puzzle his own way through this. And he isn't set on blaming Anderton. It's not black and white to him. He wants to find the truth. And if that's Anderton is guilty, then Anderton is guilty. But if that's not Anderton is guilty, he's not out to burn Anderton for no reason.
Well, although I kind of disagree with that, because I feel like in the first half of the movie, he's like a little overzealous about, he like the way he delivers
He's smarmy.
the way he delivers his lines even is just like he has it out for Anderton for some reason. He definitely is like really relishing when he goes into Lamar Burgess's office and is like, I'm gonna enjoy working here. He has a lot of one-liners like that are like, I'm a bad guy. So, but I really like his character once they get to the crime scene with all the the photos in the bed, and he's like, this isn't right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I almost wish that happened earlier in the movie, because
Yeah.
it's like I really did like his character once I saw, he isn't just the smarmy bad guy. He is. There's more to him than that.
But you're supposed to not quite know
Right.
how you feel about him. In the Mission Impossible video, you guys talked about Rebecca Ferguson being the fake ally opponent, and I being Tom Cruise's fake ally opponent. I like that Colin Farrell is Tom Cruise's fake opponent ally.
Fake opponent
Right,
ally.
totally. Yeah, because he's completely the ally by the end.
Yeah.
Also, in Scott Frank's script, there's so much gum chewing. It's like,
So it's in the
into
script.
the script?
oh yeah, it's written in the script.
One of
like,
my notes is like, there's so much gum chewing. Why?
like in
It's a little
the
noir.
in the script,
I
it'll
guess
be
so.
like Anderton's like in his office, and then like one of the girls who he like works with walks by, and she's chewing gum and smiling, and it's like just like sort of like show well, because it's showing like Whitwer kind of like taking over, like sort of like everyone gets comfortable with him. He's so charming that it's like, he's like goes to like the birthday party, and like everyone's like he, and then you see every time he sees someone chewing gum, that's sort of like, oh, like Whitwer's gotten to him. It's like Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
That's funny. Oh, like the gum chewing is evidence
That
of
like
Whitwer's
that
influence.
person was talking to Whitwer and like was charmed by him, and now they're like chewing gum, and it's like
I will say, in high school, like my first ever like actor crush was Colin Farrell.
Oh,
and
yeah?
I'm pretty sure this movie introduced me to him.
This was also my first Colin Farrell movie, and I have feelings about it. Let's just say that. He's really cute in this movie. Also, yeah, I
He's
like
cute
his
in a lot of
character.
movies.
I mean, he is, but I like his character a lot. There are a lot of other movies that he's in, and I'm like, you're probably the worst. But in this movie,
Daredevil.
it's like, yeah,
Yeah, that was like his next movie after this, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Whoops.
bullseye.
Yeah, that's right.
But that is a really interesting observation that you made, Trisha, that he's not trapped as the bad guy role. And I feel like, as soon as you feel that as the audience and you see him making deductions that a bad guy like shouldn't be able to make,
right.
it does make you like lean in and want to invest and like kind of hope that he comes to the conclusion. And I can't think of very many other examples of movies that do that.
I was trying to think of that too, and I think it's really interesting. We can get into the structure and the construction of this movie, but I really think it is that's what makes this possible, is because the minute that Whitwer stops being the antagonist is when the story world takes up the mantle of being the antagonist, which is what you guys were pointing out in the video, is that Whitwer no longer has to be the antagonist, because as long as Anderton is on the same side as Precrime, then Whitwer has to be the antagonist. But when Precrime itself is the antagonist to Anderton, then Whitwer can then become an ally. And I mean, really what we'd have to think of if we wanted to think of a comp would be, where else does the story world become the antagonist so effectively? And I'm not sure that I can do that off the top of my head. But this movie manages to pull off that sort of sleight of hand handoff right there in the middle. And then of course you have a ton of characters. You have, his ex-wife, and then you have Burgess, and then you have Agatha, and you have like then even more minor characters like Larry and
Iris
and
Wally and Tim Blake Nelson and Peter Stormare.
Tim
Oh my
Blake
god, yeah.
Nelson,
So many.
yeah.
It's that Spielberg thing where Spielberg does such a good job in certain movies, like Jurassic Park, or just having an ensemble
Yes.
cast where every character feels so distinct and so
Yes.
memorable and so full of quirks and history. It's really impressive.
It feels like in a lot of Spielberg movies, and this is obviously not true of all, he has such a vast filmography, but it feels like in a lot of ways he's committed to trying to cast the right person, whether or not that person is famous. And so like obviously you have a huge A-list star at the heart of this, and I don't think it's their first movie together, was it?
It
It was.
actually.
Oh,
I think it
okay.
was.
Yeah, in the behind the scenes, Spielberg talks a lot about how he was looking for a project with Tom Cruise.
Yeah,
Okay,
It just
okay.
kept
They
not
developed this
happening.
project together over several years.
That makes
yeah.
sense. But yes, you have a huge A-list star, but then when you look at the supporting cast, they kind of weren't these big bankable stars and everything. So for a huge sci-fi action movie, it really feels like Spielberg sort of inspired casting of like, how can I in shorthand, just by pointing a camera at this person,
Right.
convey this character in a way that like I love. And I don't know, and Samantha Morton is like
She's
Oh my god.
Yeah.
yeah.
unreal.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's also interesting, I've been thinking about your point, Trisha, of, that Whitwer has to be the bad guy until Precrime becomes the bad guy. And that the first act of this film, I think, is pretty long. Like there's a long time before that happens. It's like a 40-minute, I feel like, first act. And
Before he gets the ball saying it's him.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before it's turned against him. And I think I like movies that can do that, and maybe that's kind of why Whitwer needs to be so I'm the bad guy,
Right.
Is like like you were saying, he has to hold that for that whole time, but in that time it lets us meet all these people and get to know Anderton and his backstory, and it allows time to invest so that then when the red ball comes, we know exactly what it means and how everyone's going to react, and draws us into the story in that way.
Because for the story to work, he has to actually go a little bit on his detective hunt into Agatha's memory for a while.
Right.
You know, go into the prisoner, whatever that place is.
Right.
The temple? The prisoner place.
The prisoner place, yeah, full of all the different sticks of prisoners. Yeah, there's a lot he has to do before he's framed. So it is a pretty long first act, but it's so compelling. It doesn't feel like you're waiting for the inciting incident to happen. It feels like it's already happened.
Yeah, it's tipped off by that vision or that echo that Agatha has that then like sparks Anderton's curiosity and what you were saying. So, we got into a conversation about the structure of this movie. It does have a really long first act. It has a really long second act as well.
Yeah.
Do you remember the total runtime off the top of your head, Brian?
No, but I think it's about 2 hours and 20.
Yeah, I think
that's right.
Is what I would guess, yeah.
So you're budgeting your time differently, which makes a lot of sense because you do have sort of this mystery box at the center of this story, which is See, I set out to disprove this as noir, and now I'm just like I'm making your point for you. But
Excellent.
Yes, which is just like, in sort of classic noir fiction, you have multiple mysteries that are being intertwined. So you have who is setting up Anderton. That's sort of the secondary mystery, but then which is the more urgent one that's requiring more of time and attention spent on it in the A plot. But the B plot, it turns out to be just as important, which is what happened to Anne Lively. And so you have the interweaving of those things. That's sort of classic noir, where someone hires the detective and he's like, I'm going to work on this case because it's the one I was hired to do. But it leads him into this much deeper, usually much older mystery that has never been solved, and it involves all of the same players. And of course,
it answers the A story.
Exactly.
I want to go watch Chinatown now.
Yeah.
Well, there's film noir and neo-noir and tech noir, and Minority Report is usually used as like a prime example of tech noir, but I did some research on what the difference is between those things as a potential way to get into Minority Report, and I was like, these don't seem that much different. It just seems like it's film noir but set
Just
now.
words.
It's neo-noir but with techie stuff, and I'm like, that's not interesting. Like, well, that's just all noir. And I'm sure like if you can find like a way into it, you can hear why people separate them, but I just really couldn't. And it was like, this is not a common enough thing to really, where making a distinction is that valuable.
It's kind of the same journey I went on when doing Blade Runner, when I was like, okay, so what is like noir? What is neo-noir? Let's like comb everything and find the definitions. And there just are none. I feel like noir is such an interesting genre thing, whatever it is, that we all know it, and it's something everyone references as like, yes, this is a thing. I'm like, I like noir, but it's also like completely indefinable in any kind of satisfying way if you actually sit down and really spend time with it.
Well, they're all thematically about the same thing, which is sort of about like corruption and human darkness and those different forces that drive us to crime. Like, what is that? Why, unique among animals, do we do this for the reasons that we do this? And so anything that sort of treads in that, and also, I would say is uniquely urban, pretty much all noir is sort of this like urban story in the sense of like, what is it about living in close society in cities that drives us into this, and the systems that are in place? Because you have that a lot in detective fiction and noir fiction, is you have people within a system, usually within some kind of, either if that's like a detective that was formerly a cop or a corrupt officer, like, what is it? Rich people, usually there's some kind of like social stratification. What are those systems that then drive us to crime?
Yeah, well, and the settings in this movie, I mean, there's that middle detour period.
Yeah.
It kind of feels like it's like Spielberg kind of goes into like European art house, like grungy territory where for some reason the eye surgeon has like snot like bursting out of his nose. His assistant just flushed the toilet. She's not going to wash her hands, and now we're going to put our hands on your eyes. And it was like, it's almost like over the top, like how like grimy the world becomes.
Well, it's funny because the way that like the he did this bleaching the film thing that makes the movie so blue and washed out, and I feel like
And bloomy. The light is so bloomy around all the objects.
And I feel like in like the domestic part of the movie, it doesn't really work that well. But I feel like in the used future parts, like what you're talking about, like it actually works really well.
Yeah, totally.
And it's like there's a different director like every 10 minutes because it's like it's so Terry Gilliam when Peter Stormare's coming out and he's going to change his eye, and then when he wakes up, it's like Blade Runner. There's like projections on the wall, and there's like light coming in through the window, and then it's kind of Fincher when the spiders are going through the building and we're seeing like over the top and through the walls and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, totally.
And I think it's interesting, but it also just it's like every few minutes the movie feels like it's being directed by someone else.
Yeah, I feel like the period from when he visits Iris in the greenhouse through when he takes Agatha from the temple, like that middle part of the movie is where I feel the most whiplash. Like,
right.
Where it's like, every 10 minutes feels like a different director. But then before and after that, it feels pretty consistent to me.
Right.
There's a lot of strange little detours stylistically in that period.
But then when it comes back from that into like him going through the mall with Agatha, I'm like, oh, this looks so weird now because like now I'm used to seeing all the dark scenes, and now when it's bright again, I'm like, this looks so bizarre.
That is where I noticed the film grain the most. Is in the mall.
Exactly.
Scene. Yeah.
And one of the things that reminded me the most of was Terry Gilliam's Brazil, which is very similar, like tonal movie, and I actually went to a screening of Brazil and Time Bandits, a double feature on Saturday, and Brazil, and Brazil is still great, and Time Bandits is still really weird and dumb. But I was watching and I was like, gosh, this movie reminds me so much of Minority Report. Not in plot really, but just sort of in tone and the way that it's done. And then I was looking up trivia on Brazil, and guess who was originally considered to play the lead?
Tom
Cruise.
Really? That would have been very different.
Yeah.
Well, that middle section also, I think what doesn't work for me about it is that it feels like it's setting up consequences that never pay off.
Right.
Like when he's saying, like, you don't remember me, like you sent me to prison, like this is kind of like my payback. That's such a buildup.
Watching that scene again, like every line in that eye surgery scene is like pointing to he's gonna kill you, he's gonna light you on fire, he's gonna like make you blind, he's gonna make you blind. He's gonna do something horrible to you. Everything he's saying means he's gonna hurt you.
Right.
And then he does.
But then he doesn't, and everything's fine. And
he's also he doesn't go blind from the spiders taking his thing off.
That's the one thing that's like, he says, if you take off your blindfold before this time, you will go blind.
And it echoes in his head. There's literally voiceover repeated like 2 times afterwards. That's like, if you take it off, you'll go blind. And then
he takes it off and he's fine.
But it's like 10 minutes early, right?
No, it's like 6 hours early.
Is it? Okay.
It's like weirdly early.
He's only like halfway through the stopwatch. Okay. Yeah.
It's all so weird that I feel like there's some explanation in there if we can
why does there have to be a scene of like the sandwiches, that the rotten one next to the was that his punishment?
Gross out.
Right.
Yeah.
Putting a normal sandwich next to a rotten sandwich, was that the punishment? Is that
There's
what
a
it was
50% chance you're gonna
was that you could just put only rotten sandwiches if you want to punish him. I don't know.
That's how I like to punish people. It's just
present them with the option of
No, but I do think what you guys were talking about that middle section, I do feel like from sort of, I don't know, analyzing it again through like a genre lens, when you are in these sort of classic noir stories, you have it sort of just going back to what I was saying about like social structures and stuff like that. You have to have the like shiny good world. So you have to have those scenes with Burgess accepting an award or like, doing all of this stuff, all this. And then hit Tom Cruise's like fancy apartment where he has all of the tech and like, you have to have all of that, those status symbols and showing like the upper crust of the world in order to have that like, and then the detective or the character, whoever has to go down into like the grossest of the gross place to find the truth, because that's where the truth lies, in the human soul, in the grossest of the gross place. And so those sequences are like when I watch them, not just because of how they look, but obviously they're designed to make you cringe and grimace, and they are disgusting on purpose. But they are sort of inhabiting thematically what Anderton has to do. And honestly, the plot of his missing son is the darkest of the dark. And the scene where he's confronting Crow, who he thinks is the one that took him, and Crow has a story, and Crow's story is terrible. It's terrible. And so that's sort of where you are diving into that muck of how bad can people be, and it's really, really bad. So I appreciate that this movie goes there. I think it makes the story a little more earned. Like the idea of they get us to buy into it so well at the top, where it's like, we can stop all murder, and you just get like, yay, we can stop all murder.
Right. Sounds great.
And then you're like, we can't stop all murder because of all of this, and it's the worst. It gets you.
I agree. I like how dark the movie is, and I think
Yeah.
I'm proud of Spielberg for going to the places he goes in this movie. It's more, I just agree with Michael that it's like, why set up consequences that you're not going to pay
Sure.
off? Why have this whole big thing about you're going to go blind, and then, okay, fine, you're not going to go blind. But I really do appreciate how gross that building he's in is.
Yeah.
And I like even the kind of social commentary it makes, where you have the mom yelling at the pre-crime guys, my kids are terrified, their invasion of privacy, these spiders are crawling all over them. Like, I really like what he's doing in that sequence. So yeah, I agree.
It's questioning, who are the good guys, and are the good guys that we thought they were, like, are they not anymore?
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And of course the payoff with Burgess is exactly that.
Right. One of the things I like about this movie is that it takes that kind of what is justice, what is right idea that is in a lot of noir, and it makes it super sci-fi, where it's like, it makes me 100% buy into Precrime of like, this is such a, like, if we could stop future murder and it was perfect, like, shouldn't we do that? Like, it's a very appealing idea.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, watching it again.
Right at the end where they're like, we just shut it all down. It's like,
right.
Well, why can't they just like not put people in jail forever? Why can't they be like, we're going to stop you from killing this person. Like, we're going to get you some therapy. Like, isn't there like a middle ground where it's like, you might have killed this person. Maybe you were going to not do it, maybe. But like, we're going to intervene, and then we'll like get you some help.
And it seems like the rules that they kind of set up is that like, if you know your future, you can change it. So like,
inform
why not,
them.
Right.
Yeah.
Set up a system where you just like let people know, hey, you might murder someone soon. Maybe don't.
But you also have to think this is all being run by Burgess.
Yeah,
So
but
from
he's gone at the end.
At the end, sure.
I mean, it's probably also not like humane to be using 3 human beings as like,
That's a big
I
part
guess
of it.
that's the more
an
important
instrument
part.
of
Right.
Yeah. And that is the whole thing, is that when
All right, fine.
drugging them up, and they're like,
But if it's literally saving thousands and thousands of lives, I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
I kind of agree. Watching it again, I was like, like maybe there's some middle ground. I don't know.
the problem with it
Nice
becomes
jacuzzi. Okay, sorry.
With Wally watching them walking around.
Oh, Wally. Oh boy.
What a great character.
I'm going to air out some of what we were talking about earlier, though, which was Michael and Brian and I got into a debate in the Slack channel about what the midpoint of this movie is. And they can defend their positions if they want to. But for me, the midpoint of this movie is when he takes Agatha out of the tank. And once we have Agatha as a character, and Samantha Morton is doing an amazing job of being Agatha from start to finish, you can't put her back in the tank. Like, that's just sort of the nature of the thing. She is a person at that point. We are able to sort of, we, the audience, are able to think of the precogs as being sort of like magical beings that we don't need to have to worry about their humanity. But once you take her out of there and she is lucid and participating and affecting everything that Anderson does, she can't go back. She's a person at that point. And she's a very disturbed person who has had a lot stolen from her in her life. And of course, the secret at the end of the mystery of what happened to Anne Lively ends up being absolutely the story of Agatha. And so once we know all of that, then the only way that this ends is where it ends.
Good point.
Yeah.
In John Cohen's script, she doesn't even have a name. Like the precogs don't have names. And then when he takes her like they're hanging out in a hotel room together, like just kind of like waiting for things to blow over. Not
actually killing.
Then his wife shows up.
Wow.
But she, he says like, what do I call you? She says, I'd never had a name. And then he names her Rose. And it's very much what okay, in the original story, the precogs are named Mike, Donna, and Jerry. So,
no, Mike, Donna, and
I had
Jerry.
forgotten
but the
that.
point is, she doesn't even have a name until
Right.
as you're talking about. So it's like she actually literally becomes a character in the way that you're talking about. She goes from being just sort of this entity in a tank to being like, oh, now this is a person with a name.
Well, Anderton even says in the movie it's best to think of them as human. In the first act, that's really how he thinks about them,
right?
As just these non-human.
In Philip K. Dick's story, they're like, he uses some not PC terminology to describe like what the precogs are. Basically, they're not even like really sentient in the way that we would think of. So
wow.
Because, Philip K. Dick can go there.
Right, sure.
In a way that Spielberg can't.
Yeah, it's a different era.
Fair.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's all valid. Fine. She's a person. And I guess it may all make sense. I think what's interesting is like, I also like thinking about, like, pretty much as soon as you had pitched this, Brian, I was thinking about like free will and do we have free will? And I really, it was interesting also learning about how each script had kind of a different take on free will.
Right.
And I think it's something I think about a lot randomly. And it is interesting how you try to find that balance because, people don't like to think that they don't have free will. Everyone wants to think that their choices matter and stuff. But also we live in this world where there's physics and science and there's a cause and effect and all these things. And I like that this film really explores that and makes that like the heart of the kind of like noir-y crisis of it also, and that it's kind of paradoxical where it's like
in some ways it's a time travel movie.
Exactly.
It does a lot of the things that I like about time travel movies where it's somebody's trying to avoid a certain future but everything they're doing is leading
creating
to it.
that future.
Right.
And he only ends up there because he
knows about it.
Yeah.
It's very Oedipus Rex, where he only leaves the town because that's where his parents are, and he doesn't realize he's going to meet his parents along the way. Yeah.
I think that those questions are interesting. I think you do have to offer a comment on it. I would say the comment that this offers is not completely clear just because the mechanics sort of prevent it from being, because you end up in that sort of cyclical logic, which is like, if he'd never gotten the red ball, he would never have gone to Leo Crow.
That's the paradox.
So how in the world did Burgess actually set him up?
Right.
That's the question, because it doesn't
he
actually
only knows about where to find Crow because of the vision that he sees.
Because of the red ball. But the idea is that if Burgess is doing this, Burgess hires this actor. Okay, great. But even so,
he knows for sure
the existence of Precrime.
John's going to find him. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And when did he hire the actor relative to the red ball and all that?
That is the one probably plot hole, is just that whole setup.
And it prevents this from making sort of a clear thematic statement about free will. I think it does a really good job of raising a lot of interesting questions, and I think they are sort of thematically interrelated enough that it still feels cohesive. I don't know at the end where we're supposed to, I don't know. Well, and I think that's sort of that, honestly, that's sort of how we all live, right? Like we may or may not have free will. We will literally never know. So we might as well live like we do day to day. And we're never going to know what's behind that curtain. So
I feel like what the movie tries to say at the end is that essentially if you have awareness or kind of a self-consciousness, or if you're given the facts of where your non-free will behavior is leading, you can change it. So that seems to be what the movie's saying, is like, if you're able to somehow know where the path you're on is going to lead you inevitably, then you have the ability to course correct it. But
then it's not inevitable.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I don't know. But yeah, I think that's what the movie tries to do, I think, is saying because the whole thing with Agatha is like, your future, so therefore you can change your mind about it. Whereas if he was not somebody who had access to the vision of his future, theoretically, he wouldn't know that he had the choice.
Then he would be just Howard Marks.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
It's also changes so much between the different stories, as you mentioned, Michael. Like in Philip K. Dick's story, there are 3 Minority Reports, and each one is a result of him seeing the previous one. So he sees the first one, which makes him do a second thing, and then he sees the second one, which makes him do a third thing. And then in John Cohen's script,
so many drugs, Philip K. Dick.
Yeah, Whitwer, Whitwer, who is actually the antagonist, he makes a copy. Like, he somehow actually makes a copy, except Anderton's eyes are his natural color. So later Anderton's wife realizes, like, oh, your eyes are a different color, so how could there be 2 futures, but your eyes are a different color in each one. And she realizes one's a copy and one's not. In John Cohen's script, Agatha Rose tells Anderson, keeping track of all the names.
You're doing a spectacular job.
She says there's a boy across the street and he's going to get hit by this crane and there's nothing you can do about it. And then he runs and he saves the boy. And then he comes back and he says, you knew I had time to save him. And she says, yeah, like we see what we see, basically. And she knows the future no matter what. But in Scott Frank's script, she is waiting for Anderton to go like buy her some clothes. She's in a car and she knows that this boy is going to be hit by this crane, and then she like calls the boy over, and then he comes over, and then the crane falls and he is saved. So very clearly saying like she is able to, because she can make her own choice, she is able to stop it. Whereas in John Cohen's script, it's basically like at one point she literally says to Anderton, like, we see what we see, sorry. As in like we see the future, there is no non-future, basically.
Well, I have a question then. What do we make of Agatha's monologue about Sean's non-future existence, where she's sitting in Sean's room and she's talking about, I see this, I see this, I see this. It's Sean growing up and being successful and meeting somebody and having a family of his own. How do we fit that into all of this thematically?
I agree. I don't know, because I watched it again and I was like, wait, is this part of the mechanics of how precogs work? I don't think it is.
Is it an alternate future? I mean, I have a theory of my own, but I do want to hear you guys' thoughts.
I mean, yeah, I think it is puzzling. I remember watching it again this time and being like, is this literally a thing that she's seen, or is this just her soaking up this environment and just kind of using her imagination of like this beautiful future that could have been? Or was she able to actually read his mind? Or were these things he was thinking when he was a little boy, but those are kind of weirdly detailed future things that a little boy wouldn't like know to think about?
Making love to a pretty girl.
Right. Yeah. So, I don't know that there is a clear answer. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I just sort of thought of it more impressionistically than logically, just sort of like it's a nice image. Theoretically, there's nothing to say that they don't see multiple futures.
Right.
We just like they only can project one. So maybe all three of them see every future, but they only project the strongest one, and that's why there are differences. There's dissent among them. But they could, it's very possible that she could see this other version of the future. Or it's just possible she's like, hey, let me tell you a nice story because I'm about to scream run at you in a second.
I like how like
there's
like multiple times she could have revealed that it was Lamar. Like both in the VR place, it like cuts out right before his mask comes off.
Yeah.
And then also he's like, who killed like Agatha and Lively? And that's when she says, run!
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
Just wait 2 more seconds before saying run.
Yeah.
Just tell him.
It's Burgess.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, then I guess what you were saying, Brian, that's sort of always been my theory, which is she's doing them a kindness, essentially, like trying to offer them a hopeful, and this is, it's such an un-movie choice to never reveal what happened to Sean. Like, Anderton doesn't get that resolution. His mother doesn't ever get that Laura, I think is the name of the wife.
Lisa?
It's Laura. Lara.
Oh.
Thank you. Yeah, Lara doesn't get that resolution. We never find out what happened to Sean, and the way that he disappeared is so upsetting as well. And so it's just this like
that's so well like executed.
Yeah,
I
it
think
is.
Just
Yeah.
you look away for a second as somebody swims past, and then. Like
it's crazy.
Infinitely devastating.
It just you know what that feels like, that moment of like you looked away and something happened and now you can't fix it, and what do you do? Yeah.
I mean, and so just thinking like if you're gonna make the choice, and maybe this is just I don't know whose call this was, but if you're going to make this really hard choice as a writer, as a filmmaker, to not reveal a central mystery sort of at the heart of the plot, then you kind of maybe have to give us, the audience, something else in the form of you have to give these grieving parents something.
Right.
Agatha cannot bring Sean back, and she does not know what happened to him. And so she's just trying to provide some sort of gift of like just maybe hold on to these ideas, and maybe they're a dream, maybe they're a fantasy, but you can try to accept them or try to assimilate them instead of dwelling on this darkness. You can maybe have this other thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't want to be cynical, but maybe it was a direct result of like, I'm sure it wasn't, because I'm sure they wrote it in and it wasn't having anything to do with test audiences. But it very easily could have been a producer's note somewhere where it was just like, well, we never know what happens to Sean. It's like, okay, well, let's say something about what happened to Sean, even if and the truth is probably too terrible to write down. So let's write something better.
Yeah, I think that resonates with me. I think that's a really smart observation, that it does provide a certain kind of closure
Catharsis,
and
yeah.
catharsis.
Oh, I think you definitely need that beat.
Yeah.
With the Sean story.
Yeah. And especially from Samantha Morton. It's just that much.
By the way, her performance is so like selfless in this movie.
Yes.
She is so
Absolutely.
unselfconscious. She's willing to contort her body in weird ways, be in awkward positions. Like she commits so hard to just embodying what it would feel like to be this human who spent most of your life in like a tank.
Yeah.
And like just physically and emotionally, it's so amazing.
Yeah, her physicality, you get the sense when she's interacting with Tom Cruise's character that like he really is having to wrestle her. Like
right. Like the weight, you feel the weight.
Yeah. It absolutely looks like she has so little control of how it is that she's moving. She's been pumped full of drugs for however many years and just like essentially sort of trapped underwater in this stasis, that he actually has to handle her in like a really physical way that creates a lot of intimacy between them, which I think you do need, because she is essentially the person that's going to save him and provide him with the answers that he needs.
Childlike intimacy too. I feel like he has to protect her and take care of her in this kind of way.
Yeah. I was just gonna say like human intimacy, where it's just like somebody with needs that you have to be. You're the one that's there, so you have to meet those needs. Although he has his own, so they have that interdependence.
Do you want to play a quick game of Spielberg's original cast?
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
I've never played this game, but I like it.
So let's start with Agatha, which is, unfortunately, as much as I love her, the worst, Kate Blanchett.
Oh, no.
Right? It just seems
that would have
really
been pretty
weird.
weird, yeah.
Now,
she's too sharp.
She's too regal.
Yeah.
Too regal.
Too regal.
Yeah.
She is Queen Elizabeth twice. And one that I think would have worked just as well, or close, Matt Damon as Whitwer.
I see it.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
He kind of was too big of a star at that point, though.
Right.
I feel like you like having someone like Colin Farrell who wasn't who wasn't.
He was still kind of new. Yeah.
Ubiquitous.
Yeah, I feel like Colin Farrell is a little bit more unpredictable feeling than Matt Damon. Like I'm not like afraid that Matt Damon's gonna do something all of a sudden.
Right.
We're like, I don't know.
Whereas Colin Farrell might.
Like, right. I don't know who this person is.
Yeah, I agree.
I think we can all agree Meryl Streep as Iris Hinneman wouldn't have been a problem.
No, I feel fine about that
It
casting.
would have been fine.
The kiss would have been
Although
weird.
I do love the actress.
woman.
Ian McKellen as Burgess.
Okay. Yeah.
Max von Sydow's great, and I love how menacing
Max
he is.
von Sydow's
but-
Which
awesome.
is so a quick aside about Max von Sydow. Is that how you say it?
Sydow,
yeah.
somewhere around there.
I remember seeing this movie with my parents and walking out, and my brain was blown, and just everything's amazing. And then either my father or my mother saying like, "Well, I knew that Max von Sydow was going to be the bad guy because it was Max von Sydow."
Right.
And that was the first time that my like young brain was like, "Oh, like casting could give away who the like bad you cast an important person from a previous generation of actors to be the bad guy in this new thing."
Like when I watched Sicario for the first time and John Bernthal showed up halfway through, I was like, nope, don't sleep with him.
It's gonna
And
go
sure enough,
badly.
10 minutes later, I was like, I told you, Emily Blunt.
I mean, it is the thing where like if there's a bigger actor in what seems to be a smaller part,
Right.
you're always like, I call BS on that. Like that's gonna be a bigger part.
It was just weird, like that I have this specific moment that my young brain learned
Right, where you
that was
kinda
a thing.
got it.
This was my thing in Wonder Woman where David Thewlis just strolls on screen and I'm like,
Right.
okay, yeah, he's just passing through. Don't mind him. He's fine.
Yeah, but
Like,
sorry,
no.
continue.
Jenna Elfman as Lara, which, fine, of Dharma and
Okay.
Greg fame.
Yeah.
And then Spielberg also offered Javier Bardem Whitwer. Speaking of like casting someone who you think is the bad guy.
It may be interesting.
that-
It'd be very different.
Very
Yeah,
different, yeah.
Interesting.
Matt
It would
Damon.
be a totally different part.
You could see how Matt Damon would play the Colin Farrell version of Whitwer. Javier Bardem is like something else entirely.
My
Yeah,
immediate
is he still
reaction-
Irish? Like his father's priest in Dublin or whatever. Yeah.
My immediate reaction was like, too hot. Cannot do it.
Oh, yeah.
Cannot do it. Because like Colin Farrell's already
What if he
really
had-
cute and almost to a level of distraction.
What if he
but-
had the No Country hair?
Okay, that
Look, yeah, we're talking like Vicky Cristina, Javier Bardem, or No Country.
Vicky Cristina Barcelona.
Yeah.
And last thing I'll say on casting is like, say what you will about him, Tom Cruise is solid. Like when he
He's
finds
really
the
good.
pictures, it reminded me.
He's a movie star.
Yeah, well, sure, but a lot of movie stars aren't like
They're not
really,
as committed
really,
as
yeah.
he is. Yeah.
I mean,
I remember having disliked the first Mission Impossible. Sorry, Trisha,
How dare
and never bothering with the second Mission Impossible. When there was a third coming out, I was like, okay, I'm definitely not going to care about this. And I didn't know who JJ was at the time or anything. And then I saw the trailer
PSH.
with Philip Seymour Hoffman as the bad guy, and then he's threatening to, I'm going to count to 10, and I'm going to
So
blow
Kill
up.
her
I'm
right
going to
in
kill
front of
Felicity.
you.
Yeah, and then like every time Philip Seymour Hoffman says a number, like Tom Cruise is like viscerally reacting, and I was just like, okay, I want to see this Mission Impossible movie, and I loved it. It was great, but it was like Tom Cruise can still like have those moments where you're like,
I love how committed he is to those movies.
Yeah.
And I love Fallout. I absolutely love Fallout.
Yeah.
I mean, Mission Impossible 3, I think, is one of Tom Cruise's finest performances ever.
Definitely.
And honestly, Philip Seymour Hoffman as well. Like, they are really well matched. It's like people at their peak that are, at the top of their game. And that sequence where he is, he's sitting across from Michelle Monaghan. I don't remember the character's name, but it's exactly what you're talking about. He's running down this range of emotions. He's going through all of the stages of grief. He's like rage, bargaining, going through it. It's really good. But in this movie too, when he is screaming at Leo Crow because he thinks Crow took his son.
That scene's really intense.
Yeah.
So intense.
And then again when he's yelling at Burgess, where he says, "Don't you ever say his name," because Burgess says something about Sean.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's like a kind of a long take on him when he's looking at the photo of his son and deciding, I am going to kill this man.
Yeah.
That's a really amazing performance he gives. Just that transition he makes, just like, I am going to murder this person.
Yeah. Like, why would I kill this person? I've never seen him before.
Right.
No, wait, I've been dreaming about killing this person for this long.
Right.
Yeah. It's really intense.
So good.
Yeah.
So
Such a
good.
scene.
Reminds me, a friend of mine pointed out how good Viggo Mortensen's acting is when Frodo offers him the ring and he has to like shut his hand and turn it down. And I think it's similar because it's just an entire change of philosophy with no dialogue or anything. You're just watching an actor's face for like 30 seconds and watching them transition from one state of mind to another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do we make? I mean, we talked sort of about the weird intimacy between Tom Cruise's character and Samantha Morton. What do we make of all the other weird intimacy in this movie?
The greenhouse kiss.
Can you make anything of it?
I guess I'm just wondering, like, I trust Spielberg enough as a filmmaker that I was like, is this thematic? What are we saying? Why is there so much sexual tension where there shouldn't be any?
My teenage brain was so confused when the old lady kissed Tom Cruise. I was just like, I'd never seen that before in a movie, like a blockbuster where just randomly the old wise oracle lady like just kisses the main character for no reason, and then the scene moves on and they just keep talking.
Yeah.
Matrix would have been different.
For sure.
No, exactly. And there's so much of it too. But the scene that always strikes me is the one where Whitwer goes to talk to Lara.
Oh yeah.
That's also got a lot of tension.
It's really weird. And it's like these people have just met and he's there to inquire about her husband potentially committing a murder. And it's bizarre.
He's like right up on her.
Her ex-husband.
Although I wonder now, Michael says, say something, Michael.
Well, I wonder if that scene, if Whitwer does have a certain like fantasy where he is Anderton or he has eggs and stuff, maybe that plays into that. And I feel like for me, the Iris scene, what I've been able to compile as a logic to it, is just like demonstrating to Anderton how out of his league he is. Like it's such a like power play question mark thing.
It kind of is, yeah.
Yeah.
So what I love about her is that she just does not give a
Right.
crap. Like she has her greenhouse full of like monstrous plants
Right.
that will kill you.
Right.
She's like, I don't take visitors. She's obviously got a lot of guilt and weird feelings about pre-crime and pre-cogs and everything. So it does feel like she just doesn't care anymore. So she's like, I got a hot guy in my greenhouse. I'm gonna kiss him while I have him.
I mean, every time she does grab his face and kiss him, I'm like, same. I mean, like, I might, but I will say that, like, you have actually cracked this whole thing for me, Michael, right at the top of the show, where that's the like simmering sexual tension in like power dynamic and stuff, that's very noir. So part of me now just wonders, like, is that kind of what it is? You know, the detectives go see like a witness or whatever, and she's hot, and they're like, there's some kind of weird tension there because that's kind of noir.
It's almost like he's subverting that. It's just like the tension's going to be between people that are not normally
I wonder.
paired.
I don't know.
I mean, even the eye doctor's assistant, you know, is squeezing his butt. And,
It's very interesting. Man, Spielberg, can you come talk to us? Does anyone know him?
I mean, am I right? This does feel in some ways like one of his more experimental movies, as far as just taking strange risks and detours and playing with things.
It feels like it's at a transition point for him. He's and it really was. It was 2001 when this movie came out. I'm pretty sure.
2002.
2002. Yeah, they were filming it in 2001.
Right. Okay.
When did Munich come out? Was that
2005?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Same year as War of the Worlds, strangely.
Oh, very odd.
He does that a lot, like working on two movies at once, and they're in post.
Ready Player One in the post.
Right. Yeah. So, but then think about like AI in this movie, and then his previous movies. So think about like mid '90s Spielberg, which like Amistad. Yeah, is what I was gonna say.
The Lost World.
Yeah. Yep. So think about the 90s movies that are Spielberg, and then think about this and AI, and then move into
War of the Worlds
and Munich, and then War Horse a little bit farther along. And it does feel like he's in sort of a transition period where he's kind of figuring out the filmmaker he'll be in the 21st century. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very true. All right, cool. Well, why don't we go around and share what lessons we're going to take from Minority Report? Brian?
I want to share quickly a lesson from John Cohen before I go into my lesson, the screenwriter of the first script. And he says, never adapt a good book. Always take a book with about a page of good ideas and totally change them to suit your purposes. Better to choose a short story. Better still to choose a pulp short story from the 1930s to the 1950s. They're so goofy.
Wow.
And I think this is not my lesson, but I just think it's so interesting that and it's true, because every time you adapt something that people love, hashtag Game of Thrones, like everyone is like looking at the differences, looking at what you got wrong. But if you just take some goofy thing with some good ideas, great, you know?
You're just harvesting the good idea.
Yeah. And that is genuinely how I feel when I read the Philip K. Dick stories that both Blade Runner and Minority Report are based on, which was, I don't feel like the adaptation cheated it, because I don't even feel like it's an adaptation. I feel like it's something else, you know?
Yeah.
But the thing I was thinking about the most because of this video was the story world. Duncan Jones, who directed Moon, which I love, did a follow-up called Mute that came out last year straight to Netflix, and nobody saw it or really even heard about it. I was really excited for it. Sam Rockwell makes a cameo as Sam Bell from Moon in it. And it's set in futuristic Berlin, very Blade Runner, like very purposefully. Like he said, I just wanted to make a movie that looked like this. The setting of the movie has nothing to do with the story, which, Trish, I know you are dealing with a similar thing you may want to mention. And then when they asked him about it, he said, well, I just liked that was the setting for the movie. It just happened to be where it took place. And I think I don't like, with that movie in particular, I didn't mind it because I love the Blade Runner look, and I wish more movies did that cyberpunk kind of thing. But it did make me immediately after the movie was over say, why did this have to be set in this world? And I think Minority Report's a great example of like the story world. We talked about Shaun of the Dead, where the story world is like meaningful for the main character. Minority Report takes it to the next step, where the story world is literally a part of the story. Like it has to be actually, the main character has to conquer the story world. And I just think like that's really cool. And I think you don't see that quite enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the thing for me comes back to Witwer and just sort of this question of who can be the antagonist. I feel like when I'm designing stories, I often am just like, well, who is the antagonist? And kind of going for something that's somebody who's obvious, you know, in that sense. And asking instead the question, who can be the antagonist? Like, who's already in this world? Who is embedded in this world already that is in close proximity to the main character and might be at odds with them? And allowing that character to sort of, I don't know, I don't like talking about screenwriting like it's mystical or anything like that, but sort of allowing that character to tell me, or walking around in that character for long enough to ask myself, can they be the antagonist? Because the closer the antagonist is to the action, and in this case by necessity. Whitwer is by necessity close to the action because he is sent there and it's his job, which is a little convenient. But he ends up getting, as we've said, there is this dynamic between him and Anderton. And so, I don't know, just exploring that for myself. Who can be the antagonist, or what can be the antagonist? Can it be the story world? Can it be this other plot element or something that pops up? What's blocking the protagonist scene to scene? And it doesn't have to necessarily be the same thing from the start of the movie to the end. It's a liberating idea.
Yeah. Awesome. Alex?
Watching this movie again, I'm just so impressed by the opening sequence. I feel like it's such a good opening sequence. It does so much so efficiently. And also just as a director, watching the way Spielberg shoots so many of those opening scenes where he's got the magic gloves and going through the memories, I realized there's so many scenes that play out kind of in longer takes. They don't call attention to themselves as long takes, but he keeps the camera wide. He has multiple characters framed in the frame. Multiple things are happening with different characters. You have Colin Farrell getting kind of a tutorial about what's going on. Meanwhile, Tom Cruise is sitting through the memory. Like, there's so much happening at once, and it's so efficient and so well orchestrated. And the way the camera moves even reminds me of like things that kind of J.J. Abrams stole later on for like Star Trek. You know, the way he whips around the bridge in the Star Trek movie. Spielberg does that in almost a less self-conscious way in these opening sequences.
Well, you know, there's a video about it. The Spielberg Oneer. It's an Every Frame a Painting video.
Yeah.
Oh.
And there's a bunch of shots from Minority Report in that.
Right.
But that's a really awesome video that breaks down how Spielberg does this super well.
I gotta
Like,
watch that.
He
It's
does
really
not
good.
draw attention to it. You
doesn't.
almost never notice it's happening, but because they're not like 6 minutes long, they're like a minute and a half. But it's still like really, really smart camera work.
Right. And the reason they don't call attention to themselves is that the camera's always where it's supposed to be. It's you don't feel it's a long take because there's no waiting for it to arrive
Right.
somewhere. It's always with the action.
Well, I think one of the things they talk about in the video is that he essentially treats it as if, where do I want the camera in these moments? And rather than cutting between it, let's just have the camera travel to that and let it play out.
And careful blocking
hit
with the
those.
actors too.
Right. Well, because it feels like a dance with the actors. It's so beautifully done. So
Yeah.
just watching the opening sequence again, it's just, wow, he's a master. This is
Yeah.
amazing. I'm
Yeah.
so happy watching this.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think my lesson is also kind of director focused, where I think I'd kind of not discounted Spielberg, but just I felt like maybe he had an era, and then, I evolved and I became interested in different kinds of filmmakers and different kinds of films and all these things. And so revisiting it, I was, there was maybe some trepidation of like, oh, okay, Spielberg, here we go again. And I feel like I was just like, I felt shame thinking that ever while watching this.
Good.
How
again.
dare you? How dare you think
good
that,
Dare
Michael?
I? No,
It's
absolutely.
like the person who inspired us originally.
I know it's like some hubris or something. It's like, well, no, Spielberg was a long time ago, but I feel like that it was him doing exactly the kind of story that I love and exactly the kind of genre that I love and the kind of world that I love. This sci-fi noir ? Film, and then I kept comparing it to Blade Runner, and I love Blade Runner, but Blade Runner is not fun to watch. It's not something you
Nope.
can bring everyone to on a
Right.
Nope.
Friday night and all these things.
Right.
And watching it again, I remember being in the theater, I think with my parents, watching it like on a Friday night, release night, and just how much fun and just there was an excitement and adventure and there's fun in the story while it was also dealing with these dark, interesting sci-fi ideas that are very existential and all the things that I love. And so I think that's kind of revisiting it. That's kind of my takeaway that you can talk about interesting, serious, existential things, but still make a fun movie that everyone enjoys watching.
Yeah.
Where the story is just compelling nonstop
Right.
through and through.
Yep.
There's no period that asks you to be, a patient adult viewer. Just
Right.
no, you're along for a freaking ride.
Right.
Yeah.
You get to have both, where it's like it's a fun movie, but you also get a really good story.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Why not do both?
Yeah.
And AI is less of a fun movie, but I think both with Minority Report and AI, you really get this sense of like you watched a story. Like by the end of it, you went on a journey, as
That was
opposed to
a
some
movie.
movies where
Yeah.
you're just like, oh, it's over,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Definitely. Great. Why don't we really quick say what we've been watching this week? Alex?
So I was meaning to go to a film independent screening of Plus One because I was just curious about it. And then it was sold out when I got to the theater, and the next movie playing that I was fairly, decently interested in seeing was Rocket Man. I'm not really an Elton John fan. Like, I know his songs, but I don't really care. And so I saw Rocket Man by myself at ArcLight, and it was interesting. I did not know what I was in for, because it's basically a musical.
Right.
It's like a people bursting into song in the middle of a scene, like full on musical, basically. So at first I was very taken aback, because I thought it was going to be like a more traditional biopic. I didn't know anything about this movie. I haven't seen Bohemian Rhapsody. I didn't know anything about the director or anything. Once Taron Egerton came in, because the first part's him in his childhood. So
because it's a musical biopic, yeah.
Yeah. It was like they did the full biopic, like starting with childhood. It's like, I don't need all this. But he was great. I really loved him. I feel like he brought a lot of life to the movie, and I just kind of went with it. And it was a fun musical from that point on. But definitely expect very goofy, but ultimately kind of charming musical journey. And I have not seen Bohemian Rhapsody, but I've heard that there was a lot of sanitization of gayness and the life of Freddie Mercury, and apparently this one did that less so. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yes, that happened.
Yeah.
Bohemian Rhapsody. Can confirm.
Yeah. I'm really not in the know about these movies right now, but I saw Rocket Man, and if you love Elton John, I'm sure you'll love it.
Trisha?
One of my favorite movies from last year is First Man, Damien Chazelle's movie about the moon landing. It's absolutely incredible. It was absolutely snubbed at the awards in a way that I find criminal and upsetting. It's a wonderfully shot movie, but it got me really curious about Apollo 11 when Apollo 11 came out. And so I finally got around to seeing Apollo 11, and holy goodness, it is so incredible. So if you don't know the story, in 2017, they found a bunch of 70 millimeter film of the rocket launch of Apollo 11 that had never been developed. It was just sitting in canisters, and it's hundreds of hours of footage, and it's everything. It's people at the launch site watching. It's like inside the command center. It's just unreal, and they developed it, using our very best technology today, and you've never seen footage like it. It's crazy. It's from 1969, and it just looks unreal. It's so good. And then they also had 11,000 hours of audio, because basically every single person who was wearing a headset during the Apollo 11 mission had all of their audio recorded. So they went through hundreds of hours of this footage, 11,000 hours of audio.
I'm exhausted.
I know. As an editor.
Yeah, that's like a documentary editor.
Doc editor.
I can't imagine what they went through with this project.
So directed by Todd Douglas Miller. It's insane. So you probably can't catch it in IMAX anymore. I didn't catch it in IMAX.
It was only 1 week in IMAX, which I was so upset about. I missed it too.
But even so, like, if you can just watch a decent copy of it on a decent TV, it will blow your mind, especially if you're remotely interested in history. It's just beautiful footage, and it'll change, like, I don't know if there are any moon landing skeptics out there.
Right.
But check out Apollo 11. It might change your mind. It's just so wonderful.
It's so amazing how when you see 70 millimeter footage restored like that, it doesn't feel old. So you're looking at these people from 50 years ago, and they feel just accessible. They're
standing right in front of you. Yeah.
It's a pretty surreal feeling.
Some of the spectator footage is the best stuff they have.
Right.
Because they have just like helicopter shots of like the huge, insane crowd of spectators, and it's awesome. Yeah. Check it out.
Wow. Awesome. Brian?
So Minority Report got me thinking about a lot of the like sci-fi movies from the mid to late 90s and early 2000s. There's so many, and there's so many like actor crossover between them. There's Code 46 with Tim Robbins and Samantha Morton, which I haven't seen in a long time, so I don't remember if it's good or not. But and then there's Existence, The 13th Floor, which has Vincent D'Onofrio, who's also in Strange Days, the Catherine Bigelow movie, which I rewatched because I was like, the memory den scene in Minority Report is like the plot of Strange Days. It's like you record your experiences and then sell them to somebody. So there's literally a scene where Ray Fiennes, the main character, who was married to Juliette Lewis, gets drunk and like pulls out a disc and like relives his past marriage with her. I'm like, oh, it's Tom Cruise's Sean scene with except with Juliette Lewis. So I don't know, maybe his future is better. But
Hey,
sorry,
now.
just kidding. But the one that I actually really like is Equilibrium from I think
Yeah.
2002.
I remember
That
that.
movie's
Yeah,
great.
I love
Was
that.
that like the Matrix ripoff movie?
Pretty much.
Hey.
Basically, think someone read Brave New World, Fahrenheit 451 in 1984, watched The Matrix, and was like, I've got an idea for a
Right.
movie. Yeah. But it's Christian Bale, Emily Watson. I rewatched it unrelated to Minority Report. I just happened to rewatch it a few months ago, and it's just a really fun movie. Like you don't need it to be the best movie in the world, but like
Doesn't somebody get sliced in half down the middle at the end?
well, no, Taye Diggs, spoiler, gets his face cut off. And then
Oh, okay.
it's on the floor later.
Right.
It's fine.
What are you two even doing?
We're just it's fine. And there's a great, speaking of death spoilers, there's a great Sean Bean death, which
Oh, that is one of the best Sean Bean deaths.
it's an early death, so it's less of a spoiler, but
It's
yeah,
also Sean Bean, so it's literally never a spoiler.
Right.
right, exactly. And I'm like, it's probably my favorite Sean Bean death, which is saying a lot because there's a lot to choose from. So
Really?
yeah, but yeah, Equilibrium, I really like it.
I have my favorite Sean Bean death, but I don't want to say it because I don't want to spoil too many things.
Well, maybe because you didn't read the Sean Bean death already in the books, so you weren't as spoiled by it.
True.
Michael?
This week I saw Aladdin. I used my ArcLight ticket. It was a fun afternoon out. There were moments that didn't work for me as well, but overall it was an enjoyable experience. It made me feel like a kid several times and made me remember how much I loved the original Aladdin with a little bit of like Will Smith dashed on top, which is like, all right, I'll take that.
A little Will Smith never hurts.
Yeah. And it was also fun because we got to talk to one of the screenwriters, John August. So in the next podcast episode, we will be interviewing John August, who wrote parts of Aladdin and a million other things. And he's an app developer and all these awesome things. And we had a really great conversation with him. So look forward to that in the next episode. And before we end today, we're going to do something new. So last week, I asked people on Twitter to send us questions to discuss and answer on the podcast. We thought this could be a fun little addition to each episode and a way for our listeners to help shape each conversation. So today we're going to go through and answer a few of the questions that we received on Twitter. And moving forward, this Q&A segment will be exclusive to our patrons, meaning that if you become a patron, you'll be able to ask us questions, and each episode will answer a bunch of them and post that segment to the patron-exclusive audio feed. So if you want to help support our podcast and ask us questions for a future episode, you can head to patreon.com/beyondthescreenplay, or you can simply click on the link in our show notes. But for now, let's answer some listener questions. The first is from @Obi-Sean Kenobi. He asks, what movie left a huge impact on you as a child? Brian, what movie left a huge impact on you as a child?
Jim Henson's Labyrinth for sure. Yeah, I still love it. I still count it as one of my like top 5 favorite movies to this day. I think I loved it. I didn't see it as a child, probably like 12 or 13. But I loved it then. And today when you look at it, there are all these little clues that it's actually all a dream, basically, and that everything she needs to go through in her personal life, she is using to project to this world. There's like a picture of her mom, who is presumably passed away, who is an actress, with this actor that she was married to, who is David Bowie, in this like little newspaper clip. And then she goes on this like sort of sexual revolution where David Bowie is like this like villain, but also like attractive man, you know? So it's just like such an interesting example of a movie that's like a family movie that's also very adult in its themes, and the themes are buried, but they're there if you look for them. And I just think that's really cool.
Nice.
Yeah. Trisha?
So I have this memory of watching Jaws with my father when I was about 8 years old, which I'm going to posit is a little young for Jaws, because that movie is very terrifying. But it was sort of I don't know, I really credit my dad to my love of movies. Like I don't know, he just has been a movie fan his entire life without a lot of pretension or anything like that. He just is sort of a movie lover, and so I remember watching Jaws with him, and he was like, "That's Richard Dreyfuss. He's also in this movie and this movie and this movie," and like that's, you know, like he kind of was connecting dots to me, where it was sort of the first time where I was like, "This is an amazing story," and someone told it, right? Sort of this awareness of the other side of movies, where I was like, filmmakers are a thing, like. no, even very young, I was like, people aren't just pointing a camera at a real shark. People are creating this experience for me. And so that was sort of my first like, oh, it's a job. I could do that job. And feeling like, I mean, obviously Jaws is also an incredible film. And I would argue like, the first blockbuster. So even if you don't like it, Michael, it is an incredibly important movie. But
don't dislike.
Okay, great. Well, but it has stood the test of time. It was as magical then as it is now. And yeah, I don't know. It was one of those things that I was like, I could make movies. So
yeah. Alex?
Very similar story for me in Jurassic Park, which
yes.
I've mentioned Jurassic Park so many times in the show already as being such a huge influence on my life.
Me too.
But it was a turning point. I mean, I remember very vividly. We were visiting Santa Cruz, my family in Santa Cruz for the summer. We went to like the downtown Santa Cruz theater. It was like my first like really like, non-animated movie theater experience. And I loved dinosaurs so much my whole childhood. So I was like, I need to see this movie. And my parents were like, you're like 6 or 7. I don't know if you see this movie. And I'm like, it has dinosaurs. I must see this movie. And I just remember being like transformed by it because I felt so immersed in that film. I think the sound design.
Yeah.
I'd never seen real dinosaurs. And everything was so immersive and so real. And it touched me to my core, like just being immersed in a film universe that way, that from that moment on, I was like, I want to do this. I want to make movies.
I love that you call out the sound design. We're going to have a longer conversation about it because sound design is such a huge part of the filmmaking experience, and Spielberg's movies are flawless.
I mean, I will never forget how I actually felt cold and like shivery during in the rain,
Raptors.
In the car scene, like in the T-Rex car
Mm-hmm.
scene, like there's a lot of buildup before the T-Rex comes out. And I very much felt like I was in that environment as a kid. And it was like, how did this movie do this? This is amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Jurassic Park obviously is a great one. I'll go, I want to go with Star Wars. I feel like that's another like low-hanging fruit that I could grab on.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm actually inspired by your story, Trisha. I think I'm going to say, I remember my dad sitting me down, because my dad was also very much into filmmaking, and is a large reason why I became so excited about film. And I remember he made me watch 2001: A Space Odyssey on VHS, and he put it in the VCR and pressed play, and I was like this was a movie. It changed everything. It's like it's an art thing, and I did not like it at all. I did not understand it. I was very young, but I think from that I remembered taking away that like film, like movies could be art, that there was like this kind of other aspect to it besides just popcorn fun movies and stuff. And so I think that was one of the, even though I still have trouble watching it, that was a moment that I was like, oh, like film can be art too. And so I appreciate my dad showing me that.
It's always a challenging movie to watch, but like there's so much in it that's exciting and interesting.
yeah.
I have it on 4K Blu-ray, Michael.
Nice.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, it rewards you for watching it. Yeah.
Okay, next question. Rajiv Rao asks, what is your process for studying scripts? Trisha, do you want to take a stab at this one?
Sure. I mean, I started reading scripts basically as early as I could. And to this day, I kind of approach them. I mean, and I also worked as a reader for a while when I was interning here in LA. And so like, which I absolutely, not even interning, but just reading methodically is something I absolutely recommend. And reading good scripts as well as bad ones. I do think bad scripts are very instructive. And so I think, yeah, just quantity is helpful. Working your way through a huge stack of scripts where it really forces you to boil down story elements and boil down like character motivations and stuff like that. It's really instructive. And I mean, I'm trying to think now, like, do I annotate when I read? Very, very infrequently. I really just try, because the goal of the screenwriter is to communicate as evocatively as possible what the experience would be of watching this movie. And so like if you are taken out of it at any certain point where you're like, I should write a note about that, then the screenwriter's probably not doing his or her job. And so I don't know, as I read, I try to let myself be absorbed into the movie the way that I would when I'm watching a movie. And then at the end, I kind of step back and take a more analytical standpoint to it. I don't know. I guess it depends also on the purpose. So my experience is very specific because I these days would be reading scripts for a variety of reasons, So
Sure.
Take that for what it's worth.
It's interesting because I think my process for setting scripts is almost exactly the opposite. Where
interesting.
I feel like
Annotate extensively.
Yeah, basically. Where
Oh.
I would, when I used to, in film school and throughout my 20s, essentially, I would try to like sit down and read a screenplay and like, I'm supposed to learn from this. Then I'd be reading it and would ultimately just start playing the movie in my head. And then it would end. And I was like, well, I don't think I've actually gained anything from that. So it wasn't until I started using, and this is partially because of my iPad. I'm a big fan of the iPad Pro and the iPad Pencil, or
We
the
know.
Apple Pencil. Yes. But being able to read a screenplay and take notes constantly so that I didn't let myself slip into just kind of playing the movie in my head is what helped me be able to identify things like structure, or, the scene is serving this purpose, and I would draw lines where I'm like, oh, this is the inciting incident, this is the resolution, all these things. So for me, when I go in and especially if I have a specific purpose, like I want to look at the structure of the scene, or I want to see how this script looks at tone, I try to keep that in mind and make notes about that as I'm going, because I have this very specific purpose when I'm analyzing scripts.
So I guess the question is, are you a Michael or are you a Trisha?
That's the eternal question, really. Alex?
I mean, I'm more of a Trisha, I think, because I do enjoy when I read a good script. I do enjoy getting swept up in it and having the experience the screenwriter wants me to have, which is it's supposed to feel like you're watching the movie and you're just turning the pages and just swept along. But I've been trying to work a little more Michael into my screenplay reading recently, just for my own education, just so I can. I've been trying to work on a TV pilot outline. We both have, and Michael recommended to me, hey, read some TV pilots, but when you read them, actually, take some notes, look at how the structure is playing out. If it's a 5-act structure, how long is each act? Like, how are these acts structured within themselves? And that was really informative. So I kind of have done both.
Brian?
Yeah, for me, I think it's interesting because most of the scripts I've read in the past 2 years have been with an angle of making a lessons from the screenplay video. So I've at least had some idea of what I wanted to talk about with the film. That doesn't mean once you start reading the script that can't change or evolve or add something else. But for me, it's sort of, I'm reading a script looking for certain things. And when I find evidence of those things, then I'll make a note. But I think in general, I want to read a script. I want to enjoy the process of reading the script, but I also want to take notes. So I think sometimes it's just sort of like, let me just write down a bunch of notes as I'm reading and like say what page it happened on. And then later I can organize all that. After I'm done, I can sort of go back and say, okay, here's what actually works. Here's what doesn't work. Here's a thought I had on page 10 that never came back in the rest of the script. So it's not really valuable. I can delete that note. So it's kind of a hybrid, I think, of like, I want to enjoy the process of reading the script, but I also want to just take as many notes as possible so I can remember where certain things happened that I could go back and talk about later.
That's how I did it too, actually. I had a Google Doc open next to my PDF of the script, and I would just basically, as I wanted to take notes, I just noted which page it was on. Yeah.
And as I said, it depends on like the goal and the purpose. So I mentioned that like recently I was judging a screenplay competition, and I wasn't exactly taking notes because they were short screenplays, so it didn't feel like, I was going to struggle with recall or anything like that. But I was like reading with a little bit more of an analytical brain to them, and just trying to evaluate almost even the prose, which honestly does matter, like, because that's the whole thing. The idea of studying screenplays, theoretically, is that those of us that are doing it are screenwriters. I assume maybe someone does it recreationally, but like, not anybody at this table. But like, if you are seeking to glean wisdom, whatever process works best for you in that moment. And then also like, again, what is in front of you? It just sort of is very dependent on all of that and working out your process in the moment. I don't know. That's probably not a helpful answer.
No, but I feel like that's the only answer, is that I think everybody clearly, as even just going around our group, like everyone learns differently. And so I think being clear about what you want to get from your experience,
exactly.
and then did you do it? Did you accomplish that goal the way you did it this time? If not, try something else next time and iterate as necessary.
I think it doesn't work to try to force yourself to do it the way somebody else does it. Like I don't enjoy writing by hand, so I don't think I would enjoy writing with an Apple Pencil all over my script. Like I enjoy typing out notes. So it's just, don't force yourself into a box just because somebody else does it.
Mm-hmm. Or if you're like me, then you're going to want to get up, pace around your house, take a walk around the block, sit back down, read it again, then yell at someone, whoever's nearest, for like a couple hours about what you didn't like about it. I don't know, whatever your process is.
All right, great. Last question is from @HelloMaximad. Have you ever been disappointed by a classic when watching it for the first time? Alex.
Citizen Kane.
Really?
Yeah.
Yikes.
When I watched it for the first time,
Ooh.
I should watch it again. But when I first saw it, because it was like in high school or something.
Okay.
And it was like AFI, best movie ever, number one movie of all time, of everything, of every list ever. And then I watched it and I was just like, it was kind of boring story about this guy. And like, I get that it was like doing film stuff for the first time, but like, I didn't care really about anything through the whole movie.
And you haven't seen it since?
I don't think, I maybe saw it once again in college and then I appreciated it more, but I really haven't seen it since like I was like 18 or something, or like early 20s.
That was like the first like old movie that I saw and I got.
Okay, interesting.
Oh, I understand why this is like amazing.
So yeah, for me it was like the story just did not have me at all. So like
Wow.
I think when I watched it again in college, I got like formally why it was impressive. But yeah, neither time I watched it in those early days was I captured by it. It was, yeah.
And I think actually thinking back again, it was my dad, I think, that showed it to me and kind of gave me the context of it was based on a kind of real person and like the historical context of it that I think actually probably helped a lot.
Yeah, it does.
Right.
It does.
Yeah.
I really should watch it again.
Oh.
But I remember just being resentful because it was like, I think AFI was coming out with their like other lists
They were,
around that time.
yeah.
And so I was like, wow, this is going to be like, it's number one, everything, everywhere. Everybody agrees. And I was like, what? What is this movie? What is, I don't know. So that was my experience. Yeah.
Brian?
It's something we've talked about before, what expectation does to you, know,
Yeah.
right? And so the more a movie is hyped, the higher your expectation are. So two of my answers, which have different sort of end results right now, are Citizen Kane and The Godfather.
The Godfather.
Yes.
See, that one I got.
Right. And I don't want to say like either of them I disliked watching or anything. I just sort of thought I don't quite get why this is like the number one movie of all time. I've since rewatched The Godfather and I love The Godfather. I think it's great. But the first time I watched it, I was like, oh, this is long. There's a lot of characters. I don't quite know. It just didn't like
How
click.
old were you?
Probably 20, something like that. Yeah.
I mean,
22,
you're
23.
not wrong. It is long. It is
You're
slow.
You're on the borderline of having an age excuse.
Yeah, right.
Right in the middle.
I don't need an excuse. I also wasn't like studying film at the time. Like that's the thing, Citizen Kane, I watched once and have not rewatched it. And it's like, so I have this understanding that it is a thing that I have not quite latched onto yet. So if I'm disappointed by something the first time I see it, I don't sort of apply a negative adjective to the movie. I say, no, I've only seen it once and I've only seen it under those expectations. I also just went to Hearst Castle for the first time last week, and Charles Foster Kane is based on William Randolph Hearst. So it does make me, for many reasons, I want to rewatch Citizen Kane. But
I guess we should have a screening.
Yeah, there you go.
Let's hang out.
But yeah, it's almost like, what I will say to anybody listening is, if you saw a movie once that somebody told you was great, that's not enough. You just watch it a second time without any expectations.
Right.
And if you still don't like it, you still don't like it. That's totally fine. But like, you kind of can't see something once and kind of totally have a full understanding of it because you're always going in with those expectations.
Yeah. Trisha, what disappointed you?
Gone with the Wind. Listen, I saw that movie when I was in 7th, 8th grade, something like that. We watched it in my history class regarding the Civil War. And listen, it's very long. If you have not seen it, it will take up 4 hours of your life, or 2 VHS tapes at least. And Wow, I hate that movie.
Well, it's one of those. There's this era of movies where like they just keep going, and it's like I don't want to watch her anymore. And yeah, I'm done.
You hit on it right there because you said I don't want to watch her anymore, and that's exactly my feeling from the very first minute to the very last minute of Gone with the Wind, because I don't. Look, you don't have to have a likable protagonist. You don't have to have anybody likable in your movies necessarily, as long as you're grappling with something meaningful and you are saying something to me. I mean, because just being a person that's obsessed with theme, as long as you're saying something cohesive about it. So you can have despicable characters doing despicable things for 3 hours, and I'm here for it as long as you are delivering something that is then meaningful. But Gone with the Wind, to me, is not that and never has been that. I saw it when I was young and I was ignorant and I was like, listen, okay, so I hated that movie then. And then a couple of years ago, it was on TV on Turner Classic Movies. And I was like, I'm going to sit down and watch this because I was stupid back then. And now I am wise and I will appreciate Gone with the Wind somehow if it kills me. And you know what? It sucks. I dislike it from start to finish. You can at me. I don't care.
Love it.
Awesome.
You don't care, you don't give a damn.
Frankly, Brian, I've never seen it. I probably won't.
You really should not.
It sounds like there's no reason to.
There really is not.
Another movie there's no reason to see. Here we go. Ready? It's a Wonderful Life.
Nope.
Wait,
canceled.
When did you see it?
Bye. Did you watch all the way to the end? Or did you watch the 20 minutes?
Yeah, Michael, this isn't as a... Wait, no.
No.
It was...
Let him talk. He's wrong. Let him talk.
It was suggested, I believe, by Trisha as a potential video last Christmas.
Yeah, we all thought it'd be a good idea because it's a great movie.
Okay,
so
sure.
great to
Okay,
do about it. Yeah.
It's like the classic Christmas movie.
So I put it on. It's the best movie ever, right? It's the penultimate Christmas film.
The ending.
If it's the penultimate,
I know it's the ultimate, whatever. It's the ultimate Christmas film. And it's just I don't know. I found it extremely boring. I found it extremely hard to get through. I was just
Did you finish it?
Did you get through?
No, I could not.
All right, then.
I could not. And I understand that.
The last
I mean,
he's asking what movies you actually watched that you made.
They should just start with the ending if that's the whole point of the movie. Because around the time that he was making fun of the girl for being naked in the bush and calling the police, and she was like, I'm going to call the police to come. And he's like, well, they'll enjoy this too. I was like, well, no, I'm going to.
The girl is Donna Reed. Thank you very much.
Well,
real quick.
Yeah.
They do start with the ending.
That's true.
That's true.
There's a frame story. They're in the galaxies.
The galaxies are angels.
People are praying for George Bailey because he's thinking of taking his own
You were
life.
still in the history part. It wasn't at the present day.
Well,
you didn't catch up to the frame story, Michael.
I made it as far as I could.
Wow.
We hope you've enjoyed the podcast. This has been our last episode.
Yeah. The movie that warms everybody's hearts.
One day, perhaps I will.
Attaboy, everyone but Michael.
That was the most trolly choice of
Wow.
classic movie you didn't
I
like.
think that's just, I'm trying to be real.
But you have to-
Listen.
That's
yeah,
just
I think-
where it
don't you
is.
have to finish the movie before you see
I think
that?
so. I think that's
You
not
have
a
to
valid
finish
answer.
the movie.
You
I
didn't
will
answer the question
reserve my
properly.
judgment for some indefinite period in the future when perhaps I finish this movie.
Okay. All right.
Well, this has been our Q&A. I hope you have enjoyed. Moving forward, this will be a section that we do for all future episodes that will be a patron exclusive. So if you become a patron, you can submit questions and we will talk about them and evidently argue about them and disagree, etc.
I hope so.
Moving forward. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you for listening and we will see you next time.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.